The Movie Preview Critic. Informing and entertaining your movie world.
My Bloody Valentine 3D.
In the late 70s and early 80s, a new horror genre emerged, the slasher film, or as Roger Ebert put it, the dead teenager movie. This cinematic phenomenon sparked with Halloween in 1978, but didn't ignite until 1980 with Friday the 13th. It was a new way to be scared at the movies for a new generation. Gone were the simple chills and thrills of Dracula, Frankenstein, and Wolfman. In a world that had lived through the real-life horrors of political assassinations, Vietnam, and the always looming apocalyptic nuclear tension of the Cold War, doorknobs slowly turning and wood floorboards creaking weren't getting the job done. While the early 70s gave us a few raindrops of the audience's interest in gorier horror movies with 1972's Last House on the Left and 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it wasn't until Black Christmas, also in 1974, that the grammar of the slasher genre was coherently collected, incorporated, and presented. Black Christmas did for the slasher genre what Birth of a Nation did for feature-length narrative filmmaking. It laid the blueprint of how to make a slasher film. Black Christmas incorporated the first-person point-of-view camera from Michael Powell's 1960s Peeping Tom, the Hitchcockian tension of Psycho, and the body count structure of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and fused it all together. Perhaps the reason Black Christmas wasn't a pop culture phenomenon was the fact that we never saw the killer's face. This was a plus and minus. The plus is an unbearable level of tension and psychological torture. We keep wondering what he or she looks like. The minus was that the killer couldn't stick in our collective memory. Black Christmas had forgotten the key element of Texas Chainsaw Massacre: Leatherface, his trademark mask, and weapon, the chainsaw. Halloween took everything Black Christmas did right and added the marketability that Texas Chainsaw Massacre hit upon. It created a slasher icon, Michael Myers. And while Halloween at that time was the most successful independent movie in history, it didn't spawn a sequel until Friday the 13th blew the box office doors off their hinges. It followed Halloween's lessons by incorporating the elements of this new slasher genre and put a reverse psycho twist on at the end. Instead of the son being the killer, it's the mother. But its true level of genius was recognizing a major important ingredient in making a commercially successful slasher film: the title and setting. While Black Christmas tried to do it first by setting it, for most Americans at that time, on the most sacred day of the year, audiences didn't respond because the combining of a murder story on Christmas wasn't all that exciting. But Halloween was perfect. The scariest holiday of the year finally got its own movie. Friday the 13th took the scariest day of the year and gave it its own story. And with that, the final piece of the slasher puzzle was complete. And that's when everyone and anyone with money to risk decided to try to get in on this cinematic gold rush. Even Halloween, the catalyst to this craze, jumped aboard and finally made a sequel in 1981. With the low budgets, a slash-thirsty audience creating huge box office returns, the race was on to make the next big slasher hit. The rules were: title the movie after a holiday or occasion everybody recognizes, include sex, beer, and drug-crazed teens, and create a memorable slasher with a gimmick. Give him or her a unique mask and murder weapon. And this is where the original My Bloody Valentine comes into the story of the slasher movie. It was made in Canada on a very low budget and released on February 11, 1981. Its gimmick killer was the Miner, and he used a pickaxe. Here's a clip from the 2006 documentary Going to Pieces: The Rise and Fall of the Slasher Film, a must-see for fans of this genre.
They probably opened up the calendar and tried to find a holiday or date to exploit.
Now, we started thinking about which kind of character can be a killer that can be masked. So we started looking at crafts, and we ended up with a miner. A miner is got a helmet on, he's got a breathing apparatus, he's got a pick.
What was new and fresh about this entry into the slasher lexicon was the level of on-screen violence. Even by 1981, a mere 3 years after Halloween, the genre was getting tired. With so many movies being made, the box office returns started to slow. So to get noticed and stand out, something new had to be done. Here, My Bloody Valentine upped the ante on the violence of the killings. It was so extreme that the MPAA had to cut 9 minutes of the movie before it could qualify for a theatrical release. It's not the most polished of the slasher slasher films, but it does take pleasure in its extremeness, and doesn't shy away from living up to its name. Other movies like Maniac and The Prowler tried this realistic violence gore-filled take on the genre, and it worked for a little while, but the cycle of the genre was nearing its end. The freshness was gone, and the conventions were stale. By the mid-1980s, supernatural aspects of the slasher film kept the genre's heart beating, most notably the nightmare dream world of Freddy Krueger. But by the late 80s, the genre was too cliche and sequeled out to be worthy of the audience's time and money. And as the 90s began, the slasher genre faded quietly. For 10 years, it had dominated and defined the way we like to be scared. The cultural emotions and social forces that had organically created the genre as a pop culture defense mechanism, as a way of dealing with, experiencing, and releasing our fears through screams in a dark theater, had ended. The 90s brought new challenges to our social psyche, and the slasher film wasn't the way they needed to be expressed. But in the beginning of the 2000s, a new genre popped up: torture porn, or Gornography. Movies like Saw and Hostel had a new spin on the old horror genre. Saw was really the groundbreaker, and Hostel took the gore torture to a new level. Of course, they spawned their share of copycats trying to cash in on this new variation of the genre. But what's up with the old 70s, 80s slasher movies being remade here in the 2000s? They were relevant in the past. The 70s and 80s created that genre because there was something in the creative air, just like the 2000s cultural social climate gave birth to torture porn. So what gave rise to the remakes of these old movies? I addressed it in one of my previous videos, the Halloween 2007 remake review. Let's take a look at that segment as it relates to My Bloody Valentine. "7 years ago, audiences line up to see The Exorcist. Not a remake, a re-release. The only thing different? The addition of previously deleted scenes. When Hollywood accountants check the box office totals, they discover it's made $40 million. An emergency meeting is convened. If re-releasing an almost 30-year-old horror movie can bring in a shitload of easy money, what other forgotten horror box office hits of the past can be recycled? The Remake Act of 2000 is unanimously ratified. Box office records of years past are analyzed by studio accountants. Their mission: find any horror movie that was a moderate to a strong box office success a minimum of 20 years ago. Known as Operation SOS, or Same Old Shit. Production begins slowly. In fact, 2001 horror movies seem unaffected by the Remake Act, making good profits by following the long since established Hollywood horror box office formula. Take a simple idea, plus a director whose name never gets billed above the title of the movie, and young cast members from popular teen TV shows, and it equals a small budget and decent returns. At this point, the only sign of the remake movement's existence is the barely noticed release of 13 Ghosts. Originally made in 1960, it makes a respectable profit on investment, but fails to excite Hollywood's total faith in the Remake Act. Until the next year, when DreamWorks surprises everyone by cloning a less than 4-year-old movie, Japan's 1998 box office success, The Ring. It makes a load of cash. Another emergency meeting is convened, and the Remake Act of 2000 is amended to include J-horror. Meanwhile, studios learn a big lesson due to their lack of faith in the power of remake profit. A pair of inferior sequels fail miserably: Halloween Resurrection and Jason X. With proof that sequels no longer work for these burnt-out franchises, they now become remake targets. But not before the 10 years in the making dream fight of horror fanboys everywhere hits the big screen. The one-time concept with no likely sequel possibility is a box office hit, though it is pretty shitty. Then, later that year, the first real test of the Remake Act is finally released. A regurgitation of one of horror's most sacred cows, 1973's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. With a minimal budget, it reaps maximum profits. The floodgates open, studios push remakes into high gear. The following year, the first considerable wave of remakes batters theaters with 3 movies. All but one are majorly profitable because it breaks with the Hollywood horror box office formula, using big stars and a marquee director. Then, Hollywood's withering state of creativity becomes evident as 4 more replicas defile thousands of movie screens and bamboozle millions of moviegoers. And last year's 6 movies are only slightly profitable as audiences realize their money controls the finger of this cinematic bulimia. This year the trend slows, with most of the good 70s horror already carbon copied. Next, the 80s will probably be Holly raped, but not before this year's third Xerox is heaved on theaters. The father of all slasher movies, Halloween. In the 14 months since the release of the Halloween remake, a few others have come out since then. Starting in January 2008, it was One Missed Call. In February, it was The Eye. And in April, it was Prom Night. The horror remake craze seems to be slowing a bit, but hasn't totally stopped. Later this month, the newest addition to this pattern of cinematic travesty is a remake of the South Korean horror movie called A Tale of Two Sisters, which has been retitled for American audiences as The Uninvited. And next month, the big one comes out, Friday the 13th. This is definitely the result of the success of this Halloween remake. It had a budget of $15 million and ended up making $78 million worldwide. Of course, this means all the remaining sacred cows of 70s and 80s slasher horror will be next for greed-motivated cinematic defilement. The past slasher icons soon to be bastardized by the remake are Freddy in Nightmare on Elm Street, Pinhead and Company in Hellraiser, and yes, even f***ing Chucky. The original Child's Play is being remade. Seems like H-Wood is determined to bring every last slasher back to life for one last time and use them to suck us dry of every last dollar we have to offer. Horror movies are a way to purge out our fears by experiencing them in simulation. We scream, gasp, and laugh away our tensions. But each generation has its own worries, unique to its era, and needs new, fresh variations on these genres to help exorcise the submerged angst. These remakes are like hamburgers we've already eaten. The producers and filmmakers follow us to the bathroom, scoop up our reshape it into meat-looking patties, put some fresh lettuce, tomato, and onions on it, place it between a fresh bun, and tell us it's something new and great tasting. It's only after we pay our money and waste our time sacrificing our energy that we realize, wait, I've already had this before. It's the same old On the one hand, you can say being scared is being scared. These movies are nothing more than a way to spend 90 minutes in a state of simulated terror. It's an amusement park ride of our emotions. And granted, some older films have good ideas but lacked budget and technology to fully realize the potential of those ideas. Yes, the original My Bloody Valentine looks cheesy and lame from the point of view of today's horror movie fan. But will it be any better because the actors are younger, better looking, and the sets a little crisper and cleaner? Will it scare you any more than the original? Probably not, because it's a remake. That means it's going to be the same story, followed pretty closely for the most part. To make it seem new, some story elements will be twisted around and changed. So if you've seen the original, maybe the killer will be someone different, and the way people die might be changed a bit. All in all, it can't be that new of an experience. Here's the setup for the original. An accidental methane explosion in a mine traps 5 miners. One of them, Harry Warden, survived because he ate the other 4. When they found him 6 weeks later, he was insane. That's a pretty badass horror movie setup. After a year in a mental institution, he escapes because it's Valentine's Day, the day that the accident occurred. This is important because he learns the foreman of the mining crew left early that day to attend the Valentine's Day dance. He blames the foreman for the accident and seeks revenge. He kills the foreman and warns everyone that if the town ever holds another Valentine's Day celebration, he'll seek further retribution. From that point, the story moves to some years later, when teens decide to bring the dance back and the killing starts. I've read the summary for this new movie, and the story seems pretty lame. Not to reveal too much, but the filmmakers have taken out the best part of the original setup. In this new version, the survivor isn't trapped for 6 weeks, and he doesn't resort to cannibalism to stay alive. How is that? If you're gonna remake a movie, you're supposed to give it bigger balls, not cut them off. It's just another example of what happens when the motivation for a remake or any creation of a film is money only. Creativity, originality, spontaneity, and excitement are gone. You just do it by the numbers, it's an assembly line, and you just want to get it out to make a quick buck. You don't care about adding something new, different, and one-upping what's come before. And interestingly enough, this movie isn't even being released on Valentine's Day. How could the filmmakers and marketers that up? Oh yeah, because that weekend, the Friday the 13th remake is coming out. Smart move. Jason Redux is gonna destroy any movie that weekend. The major aspect of this movie to address is the 3D angle that the marketing is presenting. At least it recognizes that the recent slasher remakes have burned out their potential audience. So, in an effort to be different, the thrills, kills, and chills are presented in 3D. Sorry, My Bloody Valentine, Jason has you beat in this area too. Friday the 13th Part 3. In 1982, 2 recognized that the slasher genre was running on fumes, so it tried to lure audiences back with the 3D angle, and it worked. The box office for Part 3 doubled the gross of Part 2. But will it work for this movie with today's audience? Sadly, it just might. Not only is H. Wood remaking the movies, it's also reusing old gimmicks. The only horror movie I've ever seen in 3D is Freddy's Dead, way back in 1991, so it's been a long time since this type of experience was available to audiences. While the story, cliché WB teen victims, and killings will all seem the same, seeing it in 3D might be interesting enough to bring an audience to the theater. But I really doubt it'll be this awesome.
3D motion picture event to tear through the screen.
Come on, this trailer makes the 3D seem more like CGI or virtual reality. Look at this footage. Is this from an actual screening? And let's listen to this tagline.
Nothing says date movie like a 3D ride to hell.
What the f does that mean? Is it saying that dating is like being in hell? That's really nice. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, My Bloody Valentine, for making me afraid to even have a date. Actually, this reveals to us the strategy for the movie. The studio is banking on the 3D effect. Let's ask this question. If there was no 3D to this movie, would it be interesting? Would it have an audience? Most likely, no. Not even close. It's just another generic slasher story. In 1981, it raised the slasher bar for violence and gore, so it stood out. But in the age of Saw and Hostel, a new path has to be presented. And here, it's 3D. Something old, seeming as if it's something new. It'll be the first and probably the only horror remake in the next few years to take this angle. Ultimately, this gimmick is there to cover up for an absence of something more important, like creativity. And it reveals that H. Wood continues to play it safe, betting on the horses most likely to place in the money instead of risking it on the unknown long shots fueled by dreams, imagination, and storytelling courage. There's a nice metaphor that can be used here. The slasher of My Bloody Valentine is the miner. It turns out that's just like us. We, the audience, are searching for diamonds in caves, for cinematic jewels in our caverns, which are theaters. Each week we go to collectively search for some interesting stories with unique characters that we can ride new emotional roller coasters with. Instead, our movie-loving spirits die slow deaths, 24 frames per second, 2 hours a weekend, and we wonder when the lights come up, is originality dead? Do I still have hope for the future of movies? Or is this a sign of things to come? The movie preview critic rates My Bloody Valentine. I really don't want to do this, but worthy of big screen viewing only because of the 3D aspect. Since there hasn't recently been, and won't be in the near future, a horror movie in 3D, this is a rare opportunity to experience this genre in a new kind of way. And I hate myself for doing this, but see it at regular price, because horror movies are most fun in a packed theater. And with the 3D element, it'll be fun to see the person next to you and in front of you reacting to their fears in the third dimension. Hopefully the 3D technology is advanced enough to seem more realistic. If this wasn't in 3D, it would be unworthy and edited for TV. But unfortunately, the voiceover guy is right. It will make a great date movie. It's the perfect time for the popcorn trick. Though with the 3D glasses, be careful in terms of your depth perception. Things may appear larger than they actually really are. It's ultimately the same old shit, and it's not even trying to put any real effort into originality and creativity. But if you love slasher films, this should do the job for you. It exists because it's an easy H. Wood payday, and absolutely is an unnecessary remake, and is definitely a sign of the approaching movie apocalypse. And now, it's time for My Bloody Valentine's place in movie history! It won't be better than the original because it doesn't have the same balls and spirit, but it might be better than the bullshit recent slasher remakes like The Hitcher, Prom Night, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And since it's a new year, let's introduce a new segment to the reviews. Whenever a movie is unworthy, it's time for you to see this instead. If you're in the mood for a slasher film but don't want to see this one, check out the original My Bloody Valentine. And to get a better understanding on the origins and life of the genre, check out the documentary Going to Pieces. The rise and fall of the slasher film. And because we want to keep track of how a movie affects the overall state of filmmaking, let's take a look at My Bloody Valentine's contribution to cinema. In this case, it's a negative contribution. It continues the get-rich-quick through old remakes mentality that has gripped H. Wood in the last 10 years. It resurrects a movie gimmick that went out of style in the 1950s, and in the end, it makes movie viewers a little more cynical when it comes to Hollywood releasing quality movies. And let's end this with the box office psych. Since these preview reviews come out early, it's time to see if we can predict the box office numbers. Opening weekend, this movie will probably make about $20 million. Overall, the US box office should end up somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 million. So consider yourselves advised. In the meantime, choose your movies wisely, and until next time,
Long live good movies.